Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into a seriously fascinating piece of ancient source material today, the Gospel of Matthew. Now, whether you grew up reading this text or you're just genuinely curious about how ancient historical documents are put together, you are in the right place. We're going to break down the context, the incredible hidden structure, and the really distinct perspectives its author brought to the table. We're basically going to reverse engineer the blueprint of this ancient account. 40%. Seriously, wrap your head around that for a second. It's estimated that over 40% of the content in Matthew's account is entirely unique. That means nearly half of the stories, the illustrations, and the specific little details you find here, you literally won't find them in any of the other gospel accounts. That is a massive chunk of exclusive material, and it tells us right out of the gate that this author had a very specific, laser-focused vision for what he was writing. So here is our roadmap for the explainer today. First, the tax collector's gospel. Second, 40% unique content. Third, thematic first half. And finally, chronological second half. Let's dive right into section 1, the tax collector's gospel. Okay, so let's set the stage. Matthew wrote this account in Israel, and evidence points to him originally writing the whole thing in Hebrew. And get this, it was completed around 41 CE. That is just 8 years after Jesus' death. Because he originally wrote it in Hebrew and wove in roughly 100 references to the Hebrew scriptures, including like 40 direct quotes, it is crystal clear who his target audience was. He was speaking directly to his fellow Jewish people in their own language. But, you've got to ask, who actually was Matthew the man? Well, his day job was collecting taxes. And that specific professional background brings this wonderfully human element to the text. It totally explains why he was so explicit in his mention of money, figures, and values. He is constantly detailing specific coin values and financial transactions throughout his account. It's such a cool reminder that the writer's day job directly influenced how he recorded history. He basically brought an accountant's precision to an ancient narrative. All right, moving on to section 2, 40% unique content. Remember that massive 40% we just talked about? Well, here is where it really shines. Matthew curates these specific illustrations not found anywhere else. The weeds in the field, the hidden treasure, the pearl of high value, the dragnet, the unmerciful slave, the workers in the denarius, the father and 2 children, the marriage of the king's son, the 10 virgins, and the talents. I mean, that is a wealth of unique narrative. By including these 10 very specific illustrations, Matthew is carefully selecting stories to drive home a singular point to his audience. And what exactly is that point? It all revolves around one overarching theme, the kingdom. Matthew is absolutely hyper-focused on this concept. He uses the term more than 50 times throughout the text. Every single one of those unique illustrations we just ran through, they're all specifically designed to explain different facets of this one central kingdom theme. It's basically his primary thesis. Now beyond those illustrations, there's another fascinating hallmark of Matthew's unique perspective. He is the only writer to mention Jesus' repeated insistence that mercy is required in addition to sacrifice. Think about that for a second. For a target audience completely steeped in the ancient traditions of temple sacrifice, highlighting this specific teaching, that internal mercy and compassion matter just as much as outward ritual, was a profound and incredibly deliberate choice by the author. Which brings us to section 3, thematic first half. So if you look at chapters 1 through 18, Matthew intentionally throws a strict diary-like chronological timeline out the window. Instead, to heavily emphasize that kingdom theme we just discussed, he groups events and teachings together by topic. He's not just handing us a timeline, he is actively building a highly structured logical argument. Think about how brilliantly this works in practice. In chapters 5 through 7, Matthew takes massive amounts of teaching and lumps it all together into one single block, what we know today as the Sermon on the Mount. Then, immediately after that, in chapters 8 and 9, he gives us a dense, rapid-fire grouping of miracles, healing a leper, calming a storm, curing the blind. Structurally, he groups the words of Jesus, and then he groups the works of Jesus. Organizing it this way makes the information highly memorable and deeply impactful for the reader. And he pulls this same structural genius again in chapter 13, where Jesus teaches about the kingdom through illustrations. Matthew literally clusters multiple stories together in one major megablock. The seed sown on different soils, the wheat and the weeds, the hidden treasure, the pearl of high value, the dragnet, boom, boom, boom. They are all packed into this one dense chapter. It's incredibly focused. It allows a listener to grasp the kingdom concept from multiple angles all at once, without getting totally derailed by timeline shifts. All right, final stretch. Section 4, chronological second half. Once that incredibly solid thematic foundation of the first 18 chapters is laid down, the narrative style drastically shifts. From chapter 19 through to the end, in chapter 28, the account pivots to generally follow a sequential, chronological timeline. We stop pausing for those massive blocks of topical teaching, the pace suddenly picks up, and we start marching rapidly toward the climax of the historical account. The final chapters track this intense sequence of events, almost day by day. We go from the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, straight to the last Passover, the arrest and trial before the Sanhedrin, the execution at Golgotha, and finally, the resurrection. It is a rapid, dramatic, and completely linear progression that pulls the reader right to the very end of the text. Notice just how packed these final milestones are with sequential, relentless action. From the final ministry in Jerusalem, into the great prophecy, straight through the betrayal, suffering, and execution, it all culminates right at the end of chapter 28 with the final commission to make disciples. Those carefully organized thematic groupings from earlier, totally gone. They've completely given way to this gripping, real-time, historical narrative. So, we've gone all the way from the macro context of a tax collector turned writer to the microstructure of a text that brilliantly shifts from topical teaching to full-on chronological drama, which leaves us with this final provocative thought to chew on. How does knowing the author's background and this specific thematic blueprint change the way you read this ancient text today? When we understand how source material is constructed and who constructed it, it unlocks a much deeper, way more engaging level of understanding. Definitely keep this structural roadmap in mind the next time you explore this text. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it sparked your curiosity, and as always, keep learning.